The Syro-Aramaic Reading of the Koran, a contribution to the decoding of the language of the Koran, is an English-language edition of Die Syro-Aramäische Lesart des Koran, Ein Beitrag zur Entschlüsselung der Koransprache by Christoph Luxenberg. The thesis of the book is that the text of the Koran was substantially derived from Syriac Christian liturgy, arguing that many obscure portions become clear when they're back-translated and interpreted as Syriacisms. While noticeable Syro-Aramaic influence on the language of the Koran is undisputed in scholarship, Luxemburg's thesis goes beyond mainstream scholarly consensus and was widely received with skepticism in reviews. Thesis. The work advances the thesis that critical sections of the Koran have been misread by generations of readers and Muslim and Western scholars, who consider classical Arabic the language of the Koran. Luxemburg's analysis suggests that the prevalent Syro-Aramaic language up to the 7th century formed a stronger etymological basis for its meaning. A notable trait of early written Arabic was that it lacked vowel signs and diacritics which would later distinguish e, g, b, t, n, y, and thus was prone to mispronunciation. The diacritical points were added around the turn of the 8th century on orders of Al-Hajjaj ibn Yusuf, governor of Iraq. Luxemburg claimed that the Quran contains much ambiguous and even inexplicable language. Quote, he asserts that even Muslim scholars find some passages difficult to parse and have written reams of Quranic commentary attempting to explain these passages. However, the assumption behind their endeavors has always been, according to him, that any difficult passage is true, meaningful, and pure Arabic, and that it can be deciphered with the tools of traditional Muslim scholarship. Luxemburg accuses Western academic scholars of the Quran of taking a timid and imitative approach, relying too heavily on the work of Muslim scholars. The book's thesis is that the Quran was not originally written exclusively in Arabic but in a mixture with Syriac, the dominant spoken and written language in the Arabian Peninsula through the 8th century. What is meant by Syro-Aramaic is the branch of Aramaic in the Near East originally spoken in Edessa and the surrounding area in northwest Mesopotamia and predominant as a written language from Christianization to the origin of the Quran. For more than a millennium, Aramaic was the lingua franca in the entire Middle Eastern region before being gradually displaced by Arabic beginning in the 7th century. Luxemburg remarked that scholars must start afresh, ignore the old Islamic commentaries, and use only the latest in linguistic and historical methods. Hence, if a particular Quranic word or phrase seems meaningless in Arabic, or can be given meaning only by tortuous conjectures, it makes sense, he argues, to look to the Aramaic and Syriac languages as well as Arabic. Luxemburg also argues that the Quran is based on earlier texts, namely Syriac lectionaries used in Christian churches of Syria, and that it was the work of several generations who adapted these texts into the Quran we know today. His proposed methodology. Check whether a plausible, overlooked explanation can be found in Al-Tabari's commentary. Check if there is a plausible explanation in the Lisan al-Arab by Ibn Mandha, the most extensive Arabic dictionary. Check if the Arabic expression has a homonymous root in Syriac or Aramaic with a different meaning that fits the context. Judge whether or not the meaning of the Syriac-Aramaic root word might make better sense of the passage. Check to see if there is a Syriac word which would make sense of the passage. Experiment with different placements of the diacritics later added to the earliest text, the RASM. Perhaps there is a version of the RASM that will give an Arabic word that makes sense of the passage. If there is no Arabic word that works, repeat the experiment out and look for Syriac words. Translate the Arabic phrase into Syriac and check the Syrian literature for a phrase that might have been translated literally into Arabic. The original meaning in Syriac may make more sense than the resulting Arabic phrase. Check to see if there is a corresponding phrase in the Old Syrian literature, which may be an analogue of an Arabic phrase now lost. Check to see if it is a correct Arabic expression written in Arabic script, but in Syriac orthography. Plausibility, judging, and making sense of single word involves looking at occurrences of the same word in more obvious Quranic passages, and looking at Aramaic apocryphal and liturgical texts, which were carried over almost verbatim into the Quran. Word analysis. Quran. According to Luxenberg, the word Quran is a rendition of the Aramaic word Qur'an, a book of liturgical readings, i.e., the term for a Syro-Aramaic lectionary, with hymns and biblical extracts, created for use in Christian services. Luxenberg cites the suggestion by Theodor Noldaki that the term Koran is not an inner Arabic development out of the synonymous infinitive, but a borrowing from that Syriac word with a simultaneous assimilation of the type fulan. Huri. The word huri, universally interpreted by scholars as white-eyed virgins, means, according to Luxenberg, white grapes or raisins. He says that many Christian descriptions of paradise describe it as abounding in pure white grapes. This sparked much ridicule and insult from the Western press, who allege that suicide bombers would be expecting beautiful women and getting grapes. Katam. The passage in Surat al-Ahzab that has usually been translated as seal of the prophets means, according to Luxenberg, witness. By this reading, Muhammad is not the last of the prophets, but only a witness to those prophets who came before him. Our analysis. The Quranic passage in Surat An-Nur 31 is traditionally translated as saying that women should draw their veils over the bosoms. It has been interpreted as command for women to cover themselves, and is used in support of hijab. In Luxemburg's Syro-Aramaic reading, the verse instead commands women to snap the belts around the waists. Luxemburg argues that this is a much more plausible reading than the Arabic one. The belt was a sign of chastity in the Christian world. Also, Jesus puts on an apron before he washes the disciples' feet at the Last Supper. Reception. Luxemburg's book has been reviewed by Blois, New Earth, and following the English translation by King and Sala. The most detailed scholarly review is King, a Syriacist at the University of Cardiff, endorses some of Luxemburg's emendations and readings, and cites other scholars who have done the same, but concludes that Luxemburg's meta-theory of Quranic origins is not proved by the evidence he sets forth in this book. That certain of the Quran's expressions and words are of Christian origin is well-founded, and should in general be sufficient to explain the data presented here without needing recourse to either of the two more radical theories he espouses, namely that the Quran was in origin no more than a Christian lectionary, and that the language which it is written is an Aramaic-Arabic hybrid. The conclusion of King's article summarizes the most prominent reviews of Luxemburg's work that have been published by other scholars. The Quran is the translation of a Syriac text, is how Angelica New Earth describes Luxemburg's thesis. The general thesis underlying his entire book, thus, is that the Quran is a corpus of translations and paraphrases of original Syriac texts recited in church services as elements of a lectionary. Quote, she considers it as an extremely pretentious hypothesis which is unfortunately relying on rather modest foundations. New Earth points out that Luxemburg doesn't consider the previous work in Quran studies, but limits himself to a very mechanistic, positivist linguistic method without caring for theoretical considerations developed in modern linguistics. Blois is particularly scathing, describing the book as not a work of scholarship but of dilettantism, and concluding that Luxemburg's grasp of Syriac is limited to knowledge of dictionaries. In his Arabic he makes mistakes that are typical for the Arabs of the Middle East. Sala describes Luxemburg's method as so idiosyncratic, so inconsistent, that it is simply impossible to keep his line of argument straight. Quote, he adds that according to Luxemburg, for the last 200 years, Western scholars have totally misread the Koran, and that, ad hominem, no one can understand the Koran as only he can fret out for us the Syrian skeleton of this text. Summing up his assessment of Luxemburg's method, he states, the first fundamental premise of his approach, that the Koran is a Syriac text, is the easiest to refute on linguistic evidence. Nothing in the Koran is Syriac, even the Syriac borrowed terms are Arabic, insofar as they are now Arabized and used inside an Arabic linguistic medium. Luxemburg is pushing the etymological fallacy to its natural conclusion. The Quran not only is borrowing words according to Luxemburg, it is speaking a gibberish language. Sala further attests that Luxemburg does not follow his own proposed rules. Richard Crows, in a review on Livius.org, describes him as unaware of much of the other literature on the subject, and that quite a few of his theories are doubtful and motivated too much by Christian apologetic agenda. Patricia Crone, professor of Islamic history at the Institute for Advanced Study, Princeton, in a 2008 article at Open Democracy.net, refers to Luxemburg's work as open to many scholarly objections, and notably amateurism.